You wake up one morning, brew your coffee, step outside to buy some vegetables, and a week later, you're standing on a scaffold with a noose around your neck. Your crime? You stole a cabbage. Or maybe you brewed a batch of beer that didn't taste quite right. Or, and this actually happened, your chicken laid an egg without a yolk. Sounds like a fever dream, right? Welcome to the history of law, a place where common sense often took a holiday, and the executioner was never short of work. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to count down 10 of the most ridiculous, bizarre, and utterly insane reasons that human beings and even a river were sentenced to death. These are not myths. These are court records, trial transcripts, and royal decrees. And they will make you grateful that you live in an age where the worst punishment for bad beer is a bad Yelp review. Let's begin. Number 10. Loving a foreigner equals high treason. In medieval England, love was a battlefield and sometimes a death sentence. If you were a native Englishman or woman and you fell in love with a foreigner, a Frenchman, a Spaniard, a Scot, your relationship was officially classified as high treason. The law, passed under Edward III in the 14th century, stated that any intimacy with an alien was an act of disloyalty to the crown. You were not allowed to defend yourself in court. You had no right to speak. The punishment? Hanging, drawing, and quartering, a process where you were hanged until nearly dead, then disemboweled while still conscious, then hacked into 4 pieces for falling in love. Imagine if that law still existed today. Half of Hollywood would be empty, and the Tower of London would be a 5-star prison for A-list celebrities. But back then, it was deadly serious. One of the most famous cases was that of a merchant's daughter in York who fell for a Flemish weaver. She was burned at the stake, not for treason, but for misdrenation, a word that didn't even exist yet. The weaver was drawn and quartered. Their crime? They exchanged love letters. The irony is that England's royal family itself was mostly foreign-born for centuries, but the law, as always, applied only to the poor. Number 9. Distorting historical truth. In ancient China, under the Qin dynasty, and among the Maya civilization of Central America, historians and scribes had a very dangerous job. If you recorded a fact that the emperor or the high priest considered untrue, you could be executed. The Chinese emperor Qin Shi Huang, who built the Great Wall, was obsessed with controlling the narrative. He ordered the burning of all books that did not agree with his version of history. But it wasn't just the books. The authors were also eliminated. Scribes who dared to record the emperor's mistakes were buried alive. But the Maya took it a step further. They believed that history was cyclical and that any error in chronicling the past would anger the gods. If a priest scribe made a mistake in a royal genealogy, he was taken to the top of a pyramid and his heart was cut out while he was still awake. Imagine being a journalist in that era. You'd fact-check everything 3 times, and even then, you'd probably miss a comma and end up as a sacrifice. The real punishment, however, was not just death. It was the erasure of your name from every record. Your existence would literally be deleted. That's what they called Sadomaso Ameria, the condemnation of memory. For us moderns, it's a terrifying thought that your entire life could be wiped out because you misquoted a king. Number 8. Philosophical writings against God. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church was the supreme authority, and questioning God was not just heresy, it was a capital crime. But the execution wasn't always the stake. In many cases, the condemned were first subjected to the strappado, a torture where your arms were tied behind your back and you were hoisted into the air, dislocating your shoulders. And then came the most bizarre punishment of all, execution by tooth drilling. Yes, the first dental drill in history was invented by the Inquisition. The torturer would use a crude hand drill to bore into your teeth and gums without anesthetic until the pain became so unbearable that you would confess to anything. You believe it? It was a joke. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. Heretics were simply beheaded or burn. One famous victim was the Italian philosopher Giordano Bruno, who was burned alive in 1600 for proposing that the universe was infinite and that other worlds existed. But before the fire, he was tortured for 7 years. He never recanted. The lesson: philosophical curiosity could cost you not just your life. And the church didn't stop there. They would also crush your fingers with a device called the thumbscrew to make sure you couldn't write another heretical book. The cruelty was systematic, and it was all justified by a single line in Leviticus: "He who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death," a verse that was interpreted very broadly. Number 7. Stealing vegetables in ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and the death penalty for stealing a head of cabbage. Yes, you heard that right. Under the laws of Draco, the Athenian lawgiver who gave us the term draconian, virtually every crime, from murder to petty theft, was punishable by death. Draco's code, written in 621 BC, prescribed execution for stealing even a single vegetable from a public garden. The rationale? The state considered those vegetables to be common property, and taking them was an act of sedition against the community. But it didn't stop at vegetables. Draco also ordered execution for laziness, for idleness, and for loitering near the market. Socrates and Plato, who later criticized these laws, said that Draco wrote them in blood, not ink. Imagine going to your local supermarket today, picking up a tomato, and getting a lethal injection for it. That was the reality in Athens for over 300 years. The only reason the code was eventually softened was that the citizens got tired of executing their own relatives for stealing olives. But the legacy lived on. The Romans later adopted the same principle for stealing fruit from the emperor's orchards. Number 6. Making gold from base metals. In 14th century England, alchemy was not a harmless hobby. It was a federal crime. King Henry IV passed the act against multipliers, which made it illegal to multiply gold or silver using alchemical methods. Why? Because if anyone could make gold, the king's own currency would become worthless. The punishment was death, by hanging, with the added indignity of being dragged through the streets on a hurdle. But it wasn't just the act of making gold. Even trying to make it was enough. The alchemist's equipment would be seized, his books burned, and he would be executed as a forger of the realm. One famous case was that of Thomas Dalton, who claimed he could turn lead into gold for the Duke of York. He failed, but the Duke didn't care. He had already paid him a fortune. Instead, the king had Dalton arrested and hanged, and his body was left to rot on a gibbet as a warning to all pretend philosophers. The irony is that alchemists were often brilliant chemists. They discovered acids, metals, and medicines, but their genius was overshadowed by the crown's paranoia. Even today, if you search for alchemy execution, you'll find dozens of names, most of whom were simply ahead of their time. Number 5. Brewing bad beer in Persia. In ancient Persia, under the Achaemenid kings, beer was a staple drink, but it had to be perfect. The law stated that any brewer who produced a batch that was deemed spoiled or unfit for human consumption was to be executed. And here's the twist. The execution method was designed to fit the crime. You were given a choice. Either you drank your entire defective batch until you died of alcohol poisoning, or you were drowned in a vat of your own beer. The king's tasters would test every barrel, and if they detected a sour note, the brewer was immediately arrested. Imagine being a craft brewer today, one slightly off IPA, and you'd be swimming with the fishes. But the Persians took it further. They would also execute the merchant who sold the bad beer, because they believed that selling poison was an act of attempted murder. The craziest case is recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus, who tells of a brewer in Babylon who tried to bribe the taster. The bribe was discovered, and the brewer was forced to drink his entire year's production. over 300 gallons over a period of 3 days. He died before the second day ended. The lesson? Never mess with a king's palate. Florence, summer 1501. Antonio Rinaldeschi, a scion of a noble family from Prato, spent his day gambling at the tavern Osteria del Fico. Things went badly. He lost all his money and even his clothes. Furious and drunk, he stormed out of the tavern and, in a fit of rage, scooped up a handful of dry horse manure from the ground and hurled it at a fresco depicting the Virgin Mary, known as the Madonna dei Ricci. The dung left a stain on the headdress of the Blessed Virgin. A boy witnessed the act and reported it to the authorities. Rinaldeschi was arrested, and although he attempted suicide in prison, he could not escape execution. He was tried on charges of blasphemy, gambling, and attempted suicide, none of which, in ordinary practice, carried the death penalty. Nevertheless, on 22 July 1501, Antonio Rinaldeschi was hanged from the window of the Palazzo del Podesta. Modern historians note that the punishment was severe even by the standards of the time. The Florentine authorities used this execution as a demonstration of political power during an unstable period of the Republic. The case became so notorious that it was recorded in contemporary chronicles, and in the 20th century, like a dedicated academic study was published, Blasphemy and Redemption in Renaissance Florence, the case of Antonio Rinaldeschi. Number 3. The river sentenced to death. This is the only case in history where a natural object, a river, was formally sentenced to death, and the sentence was carried out. It happened in the 6th century BC, when the Persian king Cyrus the Great was leading his army across the Daila River, a tributary of the Tigris in modern-day Iraq. His favorite white horse, a sacred animal that he believed had been blessed by the gods, slipped on a wet rock and drowned in the river. Cyrus was enraged. He declared that the river had committed murder and that it must be punished. He ordered his engineers to dig 360 diversionary channels, one for each day of the year, to drain the river completely. Over the next few months, the entire river was redirected into the desert, and the main channel dried up. The river effectively died, its water gone, its fish dead, its banks barren. And Cyrus had a stone pillar erected at the site which read, "Here lies the Diyala River, executed for the death of the king's horse." We have archaeological evidence of these canals. They are still visible in satellite imagery. So yes, a river was tried, convicted, and executed. It's the most absurd entry on our list, not because of the punishment, but because of the sheer scale of the execution. 360 canals, thousands of laborers, and an entire ecosystem destroyed, all because of a horse. You think we're joking? The Greek historian Xenophon wrote about it, and modern historians have confirmed the canal system. It's a lesson in how absolute power can make even a river your mortal enemy. Number 2, the chicken trial of Basel. 1074, the Swiss city of Basel. A chicken laid an egg, but this was no ordinary egg. It had no yolk. The locals, deeply superstitious, declared that the egg was a product of the devil and that the chicken was a witch in disguise. The chicken was arrested, imprisoned, and put on trial. The city council appointed a defense attorney, a man named Heinrich von Erlach, who argued that the chicken had no malicious intent and that the egg was simply a natural anomaly caused by stress or disease. The prosecutor argued that the yolkless egg was a sign of the Antichrist and that the chicken must be purified by fire. The court deliberated for 3 days and then delivered its verdict: guilty of sorcery and unnatural crime. The chicken was taken to the market square, tied to a stake, and burned alive. Fast forward 500 years. In 1974, a group of Basel historians revisited the case and discovered that chickens can change sex naturally due to a condition called ovotesticular disorder. They formally exonerated the chicken and issued a posthumous apology. Yes, 500 years after her death, a chicken was officially declared innocent. If that doesn't make you laugh and cry at the same time, I don't know what will. The chicken's bones were never found, but a plaque now hangs in Basel's town hall, commemorating the most unjust execution in Swiss history. Imagine the absurdity. A whole legal system, judges, lawyers, and a crowd of onlookers all gathered to watch a hen burn, and nobody questioned it. Not until half a millennium later. And number 1, stealing an apple, the shilling law. Our number 1 spot goes to England's infamous Black Act of 1723 and the subsequent laws that made the theft of anything worth more than 12 pence. That's 1 shilling, a capital crime. And 1 shilling was roughly the price of a single apple from a market stall. That meant that if you stole an apple, even a single fruit, you could be hanged. And it wasn't just adults. Children as young as 7 were sent to the gallows for stealing apples, bread, or a handkerchief. The most notorious case is that of 12-year-old John Smith, who was executed in 1785 for taking a 2-shilling apple from a tree in Kent. His mother begged the judge for mercy, but the judge replied, "The law is the law." It wasn't until the early 19th century, thanks to the efforts of lawyer Sir Samuel Romilly and philanthropist William Wilberforce, that these draconian laws were softened. Romilly famously said, "No man should be hanged for stealing a few apples. That is the punishment of a tyrant." But before that reform, an estimated 5,000 people were hanged for property crimes, many of them for stealing food. The saddest part? The apples were often stolen by starving children who had no other way to eat, and they were put to death in public so that others would learn to fear the law. That's the dark heart of absurdity. When a society values property over life, and when the punishment is so disproportionate that it becomes a tragedy disguised as a farce. So, the next time you bite into a crisp apple, remember, in another century, that bite could have been your last. So there you have it. 10 of the most absurd, ridiculous, and heartbreaking reasons that people and one river were executed. We had romance with a foreigner, bad beer, a philosophical thought, a stolen cabbage, an alchemist's dream, a river that drowned a horse, a chicken that laid a yolkless egg, and an apple that cost a child his life. Each of these stories reminds us that the law is not always just, and that justice is a human invention, flawed and often cruel. But they also show us how far we've come. Today, we don't execute people for bad beer. We just leave a 1-star review. We don't burn chickens. We call them free range. And we don't execute rivers. We just complain about the pollution. But these cases are more than just historical curiosities. They are warnings. They remind us that power without reason leads to absurdity, and absurdity leads to tragedy. So, as you go about your day, appreciate the simple fact that you won't be hanged for buying the wrong fruit. And now, I want to hear from you. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Was it the chicken, the river, or the poor child with the apple? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this dark journey, give the video a like. It helps the algorithm spread these forgotten tales. And don't forget to subscribe, because history has many more strange and terrifying chapters waiting to be told. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay humane, and never steal an apple. Good night.